She stood in a mansion in Beverly Hills, a beautiful black woman in a golden yellow dress, her hands still carrying the ghost of sugar and flour beneath her nails. The same hands that built a 7-tier wedding cake so breathtaking that 300 wealthy guests fell silent when they saw it. She had no family, no legacy, no last name that opened doors. She had only her talent, and tonight, that talent was supposed to change everything. But then, 3 women in designer dresses surrounded her, and the blonde one, the one in the white dress who wasn't even the bride, looked her up and down and smiled that smile, the kind that cuts deeper than any blade because it comes wrapped in politeness. She called her a diversity hire, said her work was charming in a rustic sort of way, laughed with her friends loud enough for nearby tables to hear, and then one of them posted a photo of the cake online with a caption designed to humiliate, to reduce a lifetime of sacrifice to a punchline. And within 40 minutes, thousands of strangers were mocking a woman they had never met, attacking a craft they had never tasted, destroying a reputation they had never earned the right to judge. She walked to the bathroom, locked the door, gripped the marble sink, and stared at her reflection. And for one terrible moment, she was 6 years old again, standing in a hallway, holding a paper bag, watching another family drive away without her. But what she did not know, what none of those women could possibly have known, was that across the city, in a darkened penthouse in downtown Los Angeles, a man with a serpent tattooed on his neck set down his glass with the terrifying gentleness of someone who has learned that destruction begins not with force, but with the slow and deliberate placement of intent. He was the head of the Korean underworld on the West Coast, and the woman they just humiliated was the only person on Earth who had ever made him feel human. He whispered 2 words to his lieutenant: "Prepare the car." And in that moment, 3 women who believed their privilege made them untouchable had just set into motion a chain of consequences that would cost one of them $14 million, her reputation, her lifestyle, and every illusion she ever had about who holds real power in this world. Before starting the story, comment down below where you were watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. Historical angle. A protected insider collateral damage moment where social hierarchy masks leverage in the shadows. Historical period. Modern history. Setting. A wealthy Beverly Hills wedding reception in California. Central figures. Keisha Montel Williams, the self-made baker and public craftsman. Park Jae-sun, legitimate businessman concealing powerful criminal stewardship. Brittany Ashford Collins and her envious social circle. Central tension. Pride, protecting dignity, and fear of humiliation colliding with unseen power and inherited privilege. Historical stakes. Reputations reshaped overnight. An economic opening toward recognition for marginalized work, and sudden recalculations over who controls access and prestige. Type of outcome. A decision that seemed smart but wasn't, as it sent quiet forces into motion with few able to trace their lingering momentum. Tone. Calm but ominous. The afternoon sunlight still warmed the polished stone across the sprawling estate, and the air held a champagne brightness that made even simple words appear refined and chosen. Here, everything felt arranged, measured, preserved against surprise, as if daylight itself had been rehearsed for the sake of polished appearances. She walked among these expensive textures with the practiced steadiness of one who had earned every earned inch through patient repetition. And the satin of her vibrant golden yellow dress held a glow that made strangers stare and linger, with no echo yet of how swiftly that admiration could sour into something else. Little did she know that at that exact moment, he was watching her from the shadows near the clustered curtains of vines, his eyes quiet, their darkness untouched by ceremony. His heart already braced, because her pride always walked where danger followed close. He had built doors through decades of measured agreements and unspoken fear, and he had learned that sudden talk, no matter how small it looks, can pry at locks from the inside out, unattended but relentless. Around her, crystal captured candlelight and returned it clean, and the sweetness of perfectly layered sugar promised permanence. But she carried within her shoulders the memory of closed doors, of hands that once reached for her and fell away, and therefore her courage held the stubborn silence of a lone craftsman who refuses to be erased. She felt the familiar calm return as she supervised the presentation of her work, for creation steadies the spirit, and she believed that skill, honesty, and artistry still commanded respect in rooms like this, as if mirrors would not bend under the weight of rumor. Yet when greetings shifted, when laughter gathered with intent, she sensed the shift in air, the tightening of curious mouths around names, and what no one imagined was that one careless public strike would summon a chain of influence too vast for any gossiper's dream. The host and guests felt secure behind their lineage, believing that privilege could correct, that dominance required no consequence heavier than idle laughter, and in their minds, this moment promised nothing beyond brief levity and the next circle of stories. She did not bow, did not plead, yet her pulse trembled under restraint as she looked on, because the silent ache of being measured before being known returned with sharp insistence, and she cried inside that you cannot touch my hands without confessing how they suffered to reach perfection. You cannot claim superior legacy while you never even learned the weight of mine. He moved then, unhurried, with a stillness bred from years of knowing that small comments plant teeth, and that even a peaceable evening contains strangers who mistake the rules of daylight for safety from night. And the night itself felt suddenly nearer now, pressing closer, ready to make its first answer heard. The golden light across the reception hall trembled in the chandeliers, as though the room itself sensed the shift, and the champagne flutes on silver trays caught that trembling and held it, suspended between celebration and something else entirely, something that had not yet found its name, but was already moving through the air like a current beneath still water. She stood at her station, arranging the miniature cupcakes with steady fingers, each one wrapped in delicate paper, each one a small declaration of skill that she had earned through years of solitary practice, in a kitchen where no one watched and no one applauded. And she told herself that the work speaks, that the work always speaks, that hands which create do not need permission from hands which only consume. But the blonde woman approached again, and this time she brought her chorus, and the brunette held the phone like a weapon designed to look casual, and the redhead folded her arms with the particular elegance of someone who believes that standing beside cruelty is different from committing it. "You destroyed me once with silence," she whispered inside her chest, "and I rebuilt everything from that silence. And you will not take from me what loneliness itself could not steal." The blonde tilted her champagne glass and spoke with the easy confidence of someone who had never once been corrected by consequence, and the words came dressed in politeness, the way poison comes dressed in sugar. And she said that the work was charming, truly charming, in a rustic sort of way, and that perhaps next season something more established might suit the occasion. Something with credentials, with heritage, with the kind of background that reassures rather than surprises. The brunette laughed and tapped her screen, and the post went live, with its careful punctuation of condescension. Each emoji chosen to diminish without appearing aggressive. Each hashtag calibrated to reduce a life's work to a curiosity. And within minutes, the comment section filled with voices that had never tasted the cake, never seen its architecture, never understood that each sugar petal was a conversation between patience and artistry that most people abandon before it even begins. She saw the post in the reflection of a passing tray, caught the words sideways, felt them enter through her ribs rather than her eyes. And for one moment, the room became the hallway of a group home, where a 6-year-old version of herself stood holding a paper bag containing everything she owned, watching another family's car pull away without her inside it. That same night, she walked to the bathroom with measured steps, and the marble walls enclosed her like a confession booth, and she gripped the edge of the sink and stared at the mirror, and saw the golden yellow dress still shining, the drop earrings still catching light, the straight hair still falling perfectly. And she told her reflection that you are still here. You are still standing. They cannot unmake what pain itself could not unmake. And the tears that gathered at the edges of her dark eyes did not fall because she had trained them across decades never to fall in rooms that did not belong to her. What no one imagined was that beyond these marble walls, a telephone call had already crossed the city, had already traveled through encrypted channels and careful voices, had already reached the ears of a man who sat in a darkened penthouse holding a glass he had forgotten to drink from. And when his lieutenant spoke the words racial and humiliation and public and her name, the glass in his hand did not shatter because he set it down with the terrifying gentleness of someone who has learned that destruction begins not with force, but with the slow and deliberate placement of intent. He rose from the leather chair without haste, and his lieutenant recognized the silence that followed as the most dangerous dialect his commander possessed, because raised voices announce storms that pass, but silence announces weather that changes the landscape permanently. And in 15 years of service, he had heard this silence only twice before, and both times the world rearranged itself afterward in ways that maps could not predict. She emerged from the bathroom and nearly collided with the broad-shouldered man in the gray suit and earpiece, and his short bow carried the grammar of military discipline softened by genuine respect, and he spoke her name as though it were a title rather than a word, and she understood then with a sinking certainty that the distance she had built between her life and his life had just collapsed under a weight she never authorized, and that love, even restrained love, even love held at arm's length for 3 years of unanswered flowers and unreturned calls, carries its own authority and does not wait for permission when dignity is at stake. She walked through the garden where the hedges stood like sentinels trained to keep secrets, and the evening air carried jasmine and the distant murmur of celebration, and somewhere behind those manicured walls, 300 people continued dancing, without any knowledge that the architecture of their evening was about to shift beneath their feet, like sand retreating from a wave that has not yet arrived, but whose pull is already changing the shape of the shore. He stood beside a stone bench, with his hands in his pockets, and his posture carrying the particular stillness of a man who has spent years understanding that the body speaks before the mouth opens. And when he saw her emerge through the hedge opening in that golden yellow dress, the mask he wore for the world cracked along a single invisible line that only she had ever been close enough to trace. "You came," she said, and the words carried exhaustion and tenderness and accusation all braided together like a rope she did not know whether to hold or release. "I came," he answered, and his voice held the low register that made powerful men lean forward in boardrooms and dangerous men step backward in darkened rooms. But here, in this garden, it carried something else entirely. Something that sounded almost like surrender. "You promised me distance," she said. "You promised me that your world would never touch mine, that the flowers every Friday were enough, that the silence between us was a wall we both agreed to maintain. And now you are here, and the wall is broken, and I do not know whether to thank you or to grieve what this means." And he stepped closer, not with aggression, but with the weight of a man who had carried patience to its absolute breaking point, and discovered that even patience has a limit that the heart enforces without consulting the mind. And he said that he had honored every boundary, had swallowed every instinct, had watched from the quiet architecture of devotion without demanding recognition, but that what those women did crossed a threshold that no promise could survive. Because dignity is not negotiable. Dignity is not a term in a contract. Dignity is the one thing he would burn everything to protect. She felt the tears threaten again, and commanded them backward with the authority of a woman who had learned before the age of 10 that crying in front of others is a currency you spend only when you choose to, and never when the world forces you to. And she told him that she did not need rescue, that she had survived systems designed to erase children like her, had survived kitchens that burned her hands and clients who questioned her worth, and nights so lonely that the sound of her own mixer became the only conversation in her apartment, and that she would survive 3 privileged women with champagne courage and #cruelty. "I know you do not need rescue," he said, and his eyes held hers with an intensity that made the garden feel smaller and the stars feel closer. "I have known that since the first night I sat at your counter and watched you frost a cake at 2 in the morning with hands that trembled from fatigue, but never from doubt. And I am not here to rescue you. I am here because there are consequences in this world that talent alone cannot deliver. And tonight, I am the consequence." She closed her eyes and breathed and opened them again. And in that breath, something shifted between them. Not a wall falling, but a door opening. Narrow and cautious, but open nonetheless. And she said one thing. Do one thing. Without violence, without blood, without becoming the version of yourself that keeps me awake with worry. And he almost smiled. And the almost was more devastating than any full smile could have been, because it revealed the ghost of a boy who existed before the tattoos and the empire, and the title that made grown men speak his name in whispers. He entered the reception hall, and the room received him the way water receives a stone, with immediate displacement, and heads turned, and conversations paused, and the bride crossed the floor with genuine delight, and the groom extended his hand with the instinctive deference of wealth recognizing deeper wealth, and the blonde woman in the white dress saw him from across the crystal-lit distance and adjusted her posture and began walking toward him with the confidence of someone who has never been told no by a man she found attractive. And what she did not understand, what she could not possibly understand because her entire life had been constructed to prevent exactly this kind of understanding, was that she was not walking toward opportunity, but toward the precise and elegant architecture of her own undoing, and that the man adjusting his cufflink with calm fingers was not a guest to be charmed, but a force to be survived. He looked at the blonde woman approaching him with her rehearsed smile and her white dress that violated every unspoken rule of someone else's wedding, and he recognized in her the particular species of confidence that grows only in the absence of consequence, the kind of confidence that mistakes the silence of others for agreement and the patience of others for weakness. And he understood with the clarity of a man who had built an empire on reading people that she had never once in her 31 years encountered a wall she could not charm or purchase her way through. And tonight, he would become that wall. She extended her manicured hand and introduced herself with the breathless enthusiasm of someone performing generosity, and he looked at her hand and then at her face and did not reach forward. And in that single refusal, the first crack appeared in the foundation she had spent a lifetime constructing, because a hand left hanging in the air carries the weight of every assumption that preceded it, and she felt that weight settle across her shoulders like a garment she had never been fitted for. "I know who you are," he said, and the calm in his voice was the calm of deep water, where the current moves beneath the surface with a strength that the shore never suspects until the tide has already changed. And he spoke about the post and the hashtags and the words that were designed to diminish. And then he used one word that landed in the space between them with the force of a verdict delivered without appeal. And that word was mine. And he said, "My confitera." And the possessive carried not ownership, but devotion. Not control, but consecration. And the blonde woman blinked, and her mouth opened, and for the first time in her carefully curated existence, she discovered what it feels like when the script you have always followed suddenly belongs to someone else. She appeared then beside him, not because he summoned her, but because she chose to stand where she belonged. And the golden yellow dress caught the chandelier light and transformed it into something that looked almost like armor. And she stood with her chin raised and her shoulders steady, and her dark eyes holding the gaze of the woman who had tried to reduce her to a hashtag. And in that stance was every foster home that failed her, and every oven that burned her, and every closed door she had opened with nothing but flour-dusted hands and a refusal to disappear. He spoke then about contracts and partnerships and numbers that made the air in the room heavier, about a $250,000 annual collaboration and international recognition, and the personal endorsement of master artisans in Seoul who had described her work with reverence. And each fact landed like a stone placed carefully on one side of a scale that the three women had assumed was permanently tilted in their favor. And with each stone, the scale moved. And with each movement, their faces changed. And the brunette's fingers were already scrambling across her phone screen, deleting the post with the desperate speed of someone trying to unring a bell that has already sent its sound across the entire cathedral. His lieutenant appeared behind him like a shadow that had learned to walk upright, and behind the lieutenant stood two more men, whose silence communicated more than speech ever could. And the room felt the shift, the way a forest feels the moment before a storm, when every bird stops singing simultaneously, and the leaves turn their pale undersides toward the sky. "You destroyed her reputation in public," he said to the blonde woman, and his voice dropped to barely above a whisper, which forced everyone nearby to lean closer. "And you did it because you believed there would be no cost. Because your entire life has taught you that cruelty aimed downward is free. But I am here tonight to adjust that education, and the tuition will be expensive." The blonde woman's face lost its color the way a canvas loses paint when water finds the cracks, and her two companions stood frozen in their designer dresses like mannequins who had suddenly become aware that the store window they occupied faced a street far more dangerous than the one they had imagined. She watched all of this unfold from beside him and felt something she had not expected to feel. Not triumph, but sorrow. The particular sorrow of understanding that justice and vengeance share a border so thin that crossing from one to the other requires only a single step taken in anger rather than principle. And she placed her hand on his arm, gently, the way one touches a flame not to extinguish it, but to remind it that warmth and destruction are choices rather than inevitabilities. And she said, "I will stay, and I have cupcakes to serve." And in those simple words, she reclaimed the evening on her own terms, not through power borrowed from his world, but through dignity manufactured in her own. She walked back to her station, and the room watched her go. And the silence that followed was not empty, but full. Full of recalculation and reassessment, and the quiet internal adjustments that people make when they realize they have been standing in the presence of strength they mistook for vulnerability. That same night, long after the last guest departed and the chandeliers dimmed and the estate returned to its rehearsed stillness, he sat on the familiar stool in her small bakery in Koreatown and ate red velvet cake with the focused attention of a man performing a sacred ritual. And she leaned against the counter and watched him, and allowed herself, for the first time in 3 years, to stop measuring the distance between them and simply exist in the same room without apology. "You spent $14 million on my dignity," she said, and her voice carried disbelief wrapped in something warmer. "You are worth more," he answered, and the simplicity of the statement made it impossible to argue with, because truth, in its purest form, leaves no room for negotiation. And outside the bakery window, where the neon signs of Koreatown painted the sidewalk in red and blue, and the smell of late-night kimchi drifted from the restaurant next door, his lieutenant leaned against the black sedan and looked through the glass at the most dangerous man on the West Coast, eating cake and smiling like a boy who had just discovered that the world contains sweetness that no empire could manufacture. And he whispered to himself in Korean, that love is a terrifying thing. And the night received his words and kept them, the way night keeps all confessions spoken too quietly for daylight to hear. And somewhere across the city, in a mansion that suddenly felt less grand, a blonde woman stared at a dark phone screen and understood for the first time that the most expensive mistake she ever made cost nothing more than a few careless words spoken about a woman she never bothered to know, aimed at a heart she assumed was unprotected, in a room where the walls had ears, and the ears belonged to someone who never forgets and never forgives and never allows the people he loves to carry wounds that his hands can heal. If you saw yourself anywhere in this story, this may be your moment to stop ignoring the signs. Too many women spend years trying to understand people who only offer confusion and, in the process, slowly abandon themselves. You do not have to keep repeating that pattern. I left something to help you notice it sooner, trust yourself again, and begin rebuilding your emotional clarity. You can scan the QR code on the screen or use the link in the description and pinned comment. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been judged not by the quality of your work, but by the color of your skin or the size of your bank account? Have you ever stayed silent while someone humiliated you because you believed that dignity meant swallowing the pain alone? Have you ever had someone stand beside you not to rescue you, but simply to remind the world that you were never as unprotected as they assumed? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, silent strength, and the kind of justice that arrives not with anger, but with elegance, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.